of Directors of the American Water Works Association, New Jersey section, and I welcome you to the 9th edition of the Living History Project. I am Neil Goldfein, and I currently serve as the chair of the Retired Professionals Committee and have been involved with the AWWA New Jersey section for many years. The Living History Project is a documentary series where retired industry professionals talk about their water industry experiences. They share with us the stories and their viewpoints on the section and how changes in local and regional regulations change the landscape of our profession. The main goal is to record and document the history of our section and the water history of New Jersey. However, we hope that we will realize two additional benefits. The first is to encourage high school seniors, college students, and others to choose a career in the water industry. The second is to give young professionals in the industry a global perspective of how, when, where, why, and who we are and where we are today. Each year, the project has been available for viewing at the annual conference and other venues. We hope this year it will be linked to the section website so that it can be viewed by anyone who wants to learn more about the industry who enters into the website. For our 9th edition, we have two special interviewees. I have known both interviewees for many years, Rocco Maiellano and Brent Cacallori. It has been my honor and pleasure to have worked with both of them on various water industry committees and events. Join us as I have one-on-one conversations with our industry leaders. Welcome to the 9th anniversary edition of the Living History Project. Hello, it's my pleasure to introduce Brent Cacallori. Brent worked for the Trenton Water Works for 31 years. He retired as the General Superintendent and Chief Engineer. Some of his career highlights are he directed a staff of about 150 employees to provide water service to 61,000 metered residential, commercial, and industrial customers in the city of Trenton and in all or parts of the surrounding municipalities of Ewing Township, Hamilton Township, Hopewell Township, and Lawrence Township. He directed and managed the operation and maintenance of a 45 million gallon per day conventional water treatment plant, the operation and maintenance of a distribution system with about 640 miles of water main, 8,000 valves, 31,000 fire hydrants, two 45 million gallon per day pumping stations, two booster stations, a 100 million gallon finished water reservoir, and 6 elevated storage facilities. He directed the operation of a meter installation, meter maintenance, and meter testing facility. From 1989 to 1999, the operation of customer billing, collection, and meter reading function was under his direction. He directed and oversaw the construction of various capital improvement projects totaling over $100 million, including playing a key role in the utility securing a reduced interest rate, funding the $20 million cost of treatment residual dewatering facility, resulting in utility customers saving about $8 million over conventional funding. He also directed the monitoring and ensured the water utilities' compliance with federal and state water quality rules and regulations and other applicable rules and regulations, including OSHA, TCPA, the Toxic Catastrophe Prevention Act, and Right to Know, as well as others. Brent is also a veteran, having served in the military and the Army for 2 years. He holds T4 and W4 licenses, and he's a professional engineer licensed in the state of New Jersey. Brent graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Civil and Geological Engineering from Princeton University. He's been a member of AWWA since 1977. He's a former member of the AWWA Water Utility Council and has worked with the Retired Professionals Committee on 2 different presentations with young professionals in the committee's knowledge sharing session at the AWWA annual conference. Besides that, Brent has been an extensive contributor to the annual conference, speaking on 5 or 6 different occasions as a presenter. Brent, hello, how are you?
Very good, Neil, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thanks. How did you become involved or get started in the water industry?
Back in 1976, I got a telephone call from someone I knew from high school who had begun working for the Trenton Water Works in around 1975. And he asked if I would consider coming and joining him at the Trenton Water Works. So I met with him and eventually decided to come and join him at the Trenton Water Works. And that person was a person named Richard Russo, who eventually became General Superintendent and Chief Engineer of the Trenton Water Works. And we go back, like I think I said, we actually went to high school together. And I worked with Richard until he left in 1989.
Oh, that's very interesting. What changes or circumstances most influenced you during your career in the water industry?
That's actually a difficult question to answer. One of the things I saw is that it is how we interacted with the municipal government and how we were able to do what we had to do for regulatory compliance, for delivering good service to our customers. As the governments change, our ability sometimes to provide that level of service and compliance became easier, and in some cases became more difficult. One of the things that was difficult to deal with, excuse me, is trying to get the necessary staff to operate the utility in a way that it should be operated, to provide reliable service to our customers. Sometimes we would have to really move very quickly in order to do that. There was the absence of number of operators we needed to work, number of laboratory staff, number of field personnel, even having the necessary equipment available to do things. But we figured out ways to do it. Sometimes not as well as we had hoped to do, but on balance, I think we did a pretty good job considering the resources we had available to us.
Any outstanding circumstance in the 70s? I understand that Trenton Water had a major water supply problem in the 70s that might have keyed some of these.
You're quite correct, and I think you have first-hand knowledge of that. In Labor Day weekend in 1975, the treatment facility, which is the only treatment facility Trenton has, which was built back in '55 and then added to in 1960, had a major event where water from the previously mentioned 100 million gallon water reservoir was actually flowed back into the facility, and as that reservoir is at a higher elevation, it continued to flow until such time as personnel could shut valves to stop it from flowing. It flowed back because one of the valves that prevented it from flowing back when there was no pumping operations going on failed to close, and that caused the plant to be flooded as a result of the clear well roof being lifted up, and then the pump room floor being flooded in both the intake pumps and the distribution pumps could not operate because the motors were underwater. In the aftermath of that, there was an investigation, and what the investigation revealed, and a report was filed, revealed that the utility had been suffering from neglect from the governing body as a result of its unwillingness to raise rates, its unwillingness to staff the facility properly. And that's one of the reasons that Richard Russo came over to the water utility, and he was then given the responsibility to bring additional personnel in, and I ended up being one of those, as was for other people who now hold very prominent positions in the water industry and other utilities.
What was the regulatory climate like during your career?
Well, when I first started, it didn't seem that much of what we did was driven by regulatory compliance, and that was in 1977. But as time went on, as these major acts came about, over time we had to take steps and comply with these regulations. Sometimes they were easy to comply with. Other times they were difficult to comply with. Difficult in terms of maybe treatment adjustments, filters not performing properly. To meet, they were okay, but then when the regulations changed, we maybe had some issues with turbidity. And then even going forward, we had to outsource a lot of stuff in order to comply with this, to laboratory testing, sampling, distribution system maintenance. But I think looking back, we were able to, I don't believe we had any real violations of any regulatory requirements.
Very good. Describe your AWWA experience.
Shortly after I was hired, I was invited by both the general superintendent at that time, whose name was Louis Klockner, and Richard Russo, invited to become an AWWA member. So within 6 months after being hired, I became an AWWA member. I think the first meeting I went to was in 1978, and that was, I believe it was a national convention that was held in Atlantic City in 1978. So that was my first introduction to meeting all the folks that you can at such a function, and then thereafter, I got to attend the annual conference and then also the fall meetings, and developed a number of relationships with people in the industry. And going forward, one of the things I tried to do when I became general superintendent was to get more of our folks involved in AWWA. And was pretty successful in doing that. We used to send a bunch of folks to the section's annual conference and also to the fall meeting, and to also encourage them to participate and become committee members. One of the things about AWWA is that one of the people that became a committee chair or committee member, then became a committee chair, and then became section, what is it, section
chair.
Section chair. And I think that's one of my best accomplishments with respect to AWWA.
Good. I noted in your introduction that you had spoken numerous times. You're volunteering your time, you're putting yourself out to do that because it's not part of your normal coursework. Why did you volunteer your time, and how did that whole experience feel to speak at the annual conference?
Well, in some cases, this person who became, in fact, the person who became section chair issued an ultimatum sometimes. I had no way of saying no. But what I found in working with folks with the presentation, all of whom were a bit younger than I was at the time, I found that a very personally rewarding experience, and enjoyed the time spent in working with them in developing the presentation, and in working with them in how they presented, helping them gain confidence in their ability to be a presenter and a producer and developer of a presentation.
Thank you. Did you see any business changes during your career, not just the business of water as opposed to the function of the plant and delivery of water?
We tried to improve the business aspects of water in terms of the people who have the responsibility of running the business of water. And when I say we, the group of us that were around in the 80s, we recognized that some of those functions were not being done in a way that was standard business practice. We found there wasn't a maximization of revenue collection. There was also a disregard for metering in terms of communication of information that meter readers had, because there were two separate entities back then. One was in finance department, reading and billing was in finance department, and the operations and installations were in operations, but there was no communication between the two. We eventually took over the meter reading and billing aspects of it, and had some success in improving the business operations of actually reading meters and collecting money. We found a substantial amount of receivable out there, and then we through the efforts of us and the people in the field, were able to reduce collectibles significantly. One of the things we did in terms, and this goes back, it's like 30 years now, and they're about ready to make another change, as you'll see what I'm going to say, is that we engage in an in-house, we did this in-house remote reading project where we, through using our own people, changed all, we had a significant meter change-out program and also installed remote reading devices throughout our, at that time it was 4 municipalities. And just as a, before we did that, meters are being read at 50%, and after we get done doing that, we had percentage reads of 99% of the meters being read, and in the city it was only 97%, but that had to do with vacant houses. But, so that's one of the business things, business aspects we did. And going forward, then and even going forward, we looked at a capital improvement program and tried to develop capital improvement programs that could sustain themselves. To some extent, we were successful with that. However, there was a time where we had to suspend all capital improvement programs because of reasons that people didn't want to raise rates in order to continue to fund the capital improvement program.
What advice do you have for those just starting their careers in the water industry?
Take the time to sometimes maybe step back from where you are and try and get a bigger picture of the water industry. Sometimes folks will come in and they'll be involved, say, in a laboratory doing tests all the time, but they won't necessarily see the full view of what is done by the water utility and the importance of it. They may not understand how important it is to customers to receive that water every day, 24 hours a day. They may not understand that one of the important aspects of providing water service is fire protection. And people in a distribution system, who work in the distribution system, may not understand everything that's done at the plant. But try and learn as much as you can about that, about what you are a part of, and also take time to learn about what you're doing, and look forward to doing more than what you're doing. And another important thing is to find people who know more than you, and try and spend time with them. That's one of the things about going to conferences too. You can find people like our age who are sometimes more than willing to sit down with a younger person and then reach back in their mind and recall something that could be a real gem for that person to hear from somebody who's been around for a while.
Very good. What important memories do you cherish most from your career in the New Jersey water industry?
I think that after you've worked for a while at a place, you hope that after you leave, you can look back and say that you as an individual had some positive effect on being able to deliver a level of service that was enhanced by what you've done. And it's not so much what you've done personally, but how you've gotten and been involved in getting the organization to do that, getting the people that you have to work with and the people that you may have to manage be able to do that. And I think that when I look back, I think that I was successful doing that. I certainly didn't achieve the level of success I would like, maybe in part because those standards maybe have been unachievable. Nevertheless, I think that's what you have to do. I also enjoyed just the people I met, and I still welcome meeting those folks. We had a little get-together a few weeks ago and got to see some people I hadn't seen in a while, and that was quite enjoyable.
Looking back at your career, were there any mistakes or missteps?
I hesitate to say that there were, there a rare occasion where there were no mistakes, but certainly we all make mistakes. And sometimes if some people don't make mistakes, they don't try. I don't know if they call them mistakes. I mean, you make errors. Sometimes I don't know that you could decide to do something and then it doesn't work out. I don't know if that's a mistake, but that's a chance you take when you're in a position where you have to make decisions. Sometimes the worst thing to do is not make a decision, or hesitate to make a decision. I don't want to call this a mistake. It's maybe more of a regret than a mistake. And that is unsuccessful in doing as much as maybe we could have done when we were able to do it. Where we didn't develop capital improvement programs that were sustainable by themselves. In a couple of cases, we were able to do that, where we engaged in 5-year programs that were funded up front, and that then prevented the politics to get involved to not allow them to move forward. So if a rate case year was coming up, that capital improvement program was funded and in place for 5 years. Those are that kind of thing, being able to do things sooner than we eventually got them done.
How did you balance, I mean, again, in the position that you held, there are a lot of time demands on you. How did you balance work and home life?
For me, it was maybe easier than a lot of folks. I was not married, and I don't have any children. So I didn't have those kinds of demands that a lot of folks have, and it didn't seem to me that I was overweighted with work. I enjoyed, many of the things we did I enjoyed. And it wasn't something that was totally joyful. We had but that's part of the challenges of working. So I didn't have the kinds of problems that a lot of folks did. So if I had a day where I had to stay till 6 o'clock, it wasn't a problem. I didn't have to call home and tell my wife she had to take care of the kids that night, or she couldn't go where she had to go. But there were times when I think I overdid it. But that's what I did. So
okay. Do you have any advice for anyone who would be retiring soon?
If someone's about to retire because they believe it's time to retire and they are making that decision, sometimes people have to retire when others make that decision for them. That's a totally different thing, because that becomes a whole new road you have to go down that you didn't do research on. But if you're planning your retirement and you determine when you retire, there are standard kinds of things you have to do. You have to understand what your income is going to be, understand whether that income is going to be satisfactory. You have to understand I understand it, recognize that when you retire, are you going to have the same amount of social interaction that a job brings to you? That's one of the things that I found, is that the not the lack of, but the reduction of social interaction becomes noticeable after a while. Even though when you're in a job, you go into work and you got to talk to somebody you'd rather not talk to. But then after that, you may be able to talk to somebody you don't mind talking to. But that type of interaction is something that some folks, to some extent, I missed it. And I've talked to other folks who missed that also. And if you research about retirement, that's something you have to be prepared for, is the change in social interaction. Some folks don't have any problem at all because they have a very active social integration outside of work. But if you don't have that, that becomes a critical thing that you have to be aware of before you retire.
Very good. Did you have a mentor in the industry, and if so, who were they, and how did that individual influence your career?
I had a couple of folks. First of which is the person I mentioned before, Lou Klockner. Lou was the General Superintendent, Chief Engineer of Trenton Water Works. He started there in 1948 and was there responsible for built the new plant and did a lot of main extension work during the 50s and 60s. I arrived at Trenton Water in 1977, and Lou was scheduled to retire in 79, which he did. But he became more of a mentor after he retired, because we spent a lot of time together after that. And he was able to teach me things that you don't necessarily learn in books, about how to deal with people, how to deal with contractors. And when he left us, I really missed him. I still miss him today. The other person is a person I mentioned before, Richard Russo, who's the one who brought me into the industry. And Richard and I worked together until he left Trenton Water in 1989, but continued our relationship till this day, and have been very good friends ever since we started working together. Actually, we knew each other before that, but we became much better friends, much closer friends, as a result of our relationship beginning in 1977. Richard taught me a lot of things, and I taught him some things.
Will he admit that?
No. Richard taught me about some things to do, and he also taught me about some things not to do, as I hope I taught him too. There's somebody else, but I really can't speak about that other person.
Okay. All right. Well, Brent, thank you very much. I think this has been a very good interview, and I hope that the people viewing it have learned a lot.
I hope so too, Neil. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure today to introduce Rocco Maiellano. Rocco's been involved in the water and wastewater profession for over 40 years, beginning as a laborer with the Mount Laurel MUA in 1974, retiring as executive director of the Evesham Township MUA in 2010, and continuing to today as a licensed operator at several New Jersey water and wastewater facilities. Rocco holds an associate's degree in business administration and has completed the Rowan College Business Management program. He is a certified Department of Homeland Security infrastructure specialist. He is also one of the rare members of the Four Tops, licensed operators that hold the highest state license in 4 different categories. There are only 13 operators out of the thousands of operators in the state of New Jersey that hold this distinction. He even holds an even rarer distinction by holding the highest operator licenses in 5 different categories. Rocco's commitment to the water and wastewater professional organizations is extensive. He is a past president of both the New Jersey Water Environment and South Jersey Water Environment Associations. He served 2 terms on the National Water Environment Federation's Executive Committee and continues to serve as a committee chair. He has served on the State Public Employees Retirement System and the Investment Council and served as chairperson of the New Jersey Joint Insurance Fund Safety Committee and was one of the persons instrumental in forming the Safety Exposition. Presently, he is a member of the NJDEP Education Advisory Committee. This committee consists of professionals providing support and funding for the education of water and wastewater operators in the state of New Jersey. Rocco is an award winner. He's won many awards, starting with the Water Environment Federation's Charles Alvin Emerson Medal, the New Jersey Utility Association Joint Insurance Fund Lifetime Safety Award, the Arthur Sidney Bedell Award, the New Jersey WEA Service Award, the South Jersey WEA Case Award, the South Jersey Water Professionals 2010 Lifetime Achievement Award, and the EPA Service Award. It's also been awarded the South Jersey Water Professionals Association Golden Manhole Key and the NJWA Sanitary Shovel Award. In September of 2014, the Evesham MUA dedicated the Lincoln Drive 2 million gallon water tank, which is now known as the Rocco Maiellano water tank. He's married to Jeannie, his wife of 50 years, and has 2 children and 4 grandchildren. Rocco, good morning. How are you doing?
Pretty good, Neil. Thank you.
How did you become involved in the water industry?
Well, back in 1974, I was working for a company called Robert Hall Clothing. It essentially was a tailor shop that made, that made suits, and it was a sweatshop. It, wasn't. It was hot even in the winter. It was hot. Well, they went bankrupt in 1974, and I was put out of work, and they told me they would keep my name in for at least 2 years. Well, I wasn't going to wait 2 years to get a job back, so I started looking for a job. And I saw a little ad in the paper, the Courier Post in New Jersey, said wanted water and sewer laborer. Well, I go down there and I speak to the superintendent, and after the interview, I talked to him about it. He said, "Well, what experience do you have in water and sewer?" At the time, I thought flushing the toilet was enough, for knowing about water and sewer. And he didn't seem too impressed with my qualifications. And in the meantime, I had been talking to his secretary on the outside, Joan. And when I walked out, she said, "Did you get the job?" And I said, "I don't think so. I think that he's going to do some other interviews." And she said, "Wait a minute, I'll be right back." And she walked into the office, and she came back out a couple minutes later and said, "You start Monday." And it was for $2.19 an hour. And if I had went on unemployment, if you took the $2.19 an hour, deducted the taxes and whatever else they would pay, I would have got more money on unemployment for $60 a week than I would working. But I decided to go to work. And that's basically how I got involved. I mean, when I started out, it was cold. It was in March. I wasn't used to being outside. And in fact, I called my wife up on the phone. There was no cell phones back then. I said, "I'm going to quit. This is too cold out here." And one of the guys told me, he says, "You got to start wearing thermal underwear." I mean, So I did that. But in the meantime, I came back that day after reading water meters. The guy says to me, "You read more water meters in 2 hours than my guy's reading 8 hours." He says, "How did you do that?" I said, "Well, I was running because it was cold. I didn't know anything about that." But that's basically how I got started. And my wife was very supportive. She said, "If you want to work the job, work it. If you don't want, come home, you find something else." But thank God I did take that job.
How did you transition from that job to being an operator and eventually to being an executive director?
Well, when you work, you got to remember too, most of my career has been in both water, wastewater, collection, and distribution. So I've done all 4, other than Cherry Hill, which was only wastewater. Mount Laurel was all 4, water, wastewater, collection, and distribution. Evesham was water, wastewater collection and distribution. So I've had experience in all four of the different areas. And when I went to Cherry Hill, it was strictly wastewater. But I left Mount Laurel. It was just basically for reasons of making more money. I was offered more money to go to Cherry Hill as an assistant supervisor, which I worked my way up in Cherry Hill to a what they call, was like the supervisor of supervisors. They were Tech 3, Tech 4. They were different. They gave different designations. And one day I was in at one of the meetings, and this was the South Jersey Water Pollution back then. And I met the superintendent of Evesham, Robert Flynn, and he offered me a job, going there. And that's how basically, and that's where I stood for 30 years after I left Cherry Hill. So from 1974 to 1980, I worked two different facilities. When I went in 1980, I worked at the Evesham MUA, and that's where I spent the rest of my career.
So you came into Evesham as a supervisor, operator. How did you end up moving up into the other positions?
I came in as an assistant supervisor. There was only one other supervisor there. And I came in as an assistant supervisor. And I guess my experience that I had from Cherry Hill, working with management people, and it was, when I first went to Evesham, there was only 13 guys. And we laid off 9 the first year and had to do it 4. Because we changed some operations. We changed from drying beds to a machine that now did the sludge, so we need all the guys. And so it basically started hiring back. In 1981, we started hiring back people with more experience in the wastewater industry. And from that, my boss at the time, Bob Flynn, he made me equal with the supervisor was there. Then eventually we hired more supervisors, and we needed someone to direct those, to supervise them. So I then became a manager. And then from there I became superintendent. From there I became assistant executive director, then eventually executive director. So I moved through all the ranks over the course of the 30 years. So the last 3 years of my time there was as executive director.
That's very interesting. What changes or circumstances most influenced you during your career in the industry?
Well, I think the employees, the dedication, the people that I was involved with, looking at the industry itself, there was a lot of movement in the industry. There was a lot of, and I guess some of the things I liked was the fact that, especially in the wastewater plant and the water, I could walk out on that plant in the morning and see the dirty water coming in. It was, people sending their whatever water in. And then go at the end of the plant and look at the clean water going out and know that I've accomplished something immediately. I mean, that's very hard for people to see an accomplishment in 6 hours of going through a treatment plant. To look at it and know that what you're putting back in the stream. We had Boy Scout camps down the end of the stream that was at the end of the plant. And that water had to be, we always felt that our water was better than the water that was in the stream. It was cleaner than the water in the stream. And as far as the water itself, the drinking water, the potable water, most of it was pumped from the wells, deep wells, 500 feet deep. But we also believed that we had to make sure that we had that water 24/7. The fire company make sure they had what they needed, whether it was 1,000 or 1,500 gallons a minute, at all times. I mean, there was always discussions about, well, that's just a metal piece standing out in the ground. The hydrant's just a metal piece of, and we always said, hey, it's more than that. It's what you bring to that hydrant that you have to be cognizant of. And basically, I just got the feeling of accomplishment from my job.
What was the regulatory climate like while you were working?
When I started out, the regulatory climate was really lax. I mean, you look at from 74 to about 90, the DEP and I guess whoever else it was had where they could negotiate fines. They had discretion to negotiate fines and things like that. But when you got into the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act, they took the discretionary away from them. So it meant that the fines were the fines, and ultimately people could go to jail. And I guess then the big thing that happened around 1993, which I serve now on the Education Advisory Committee, was that delegated agencies now had to set aside part of their penalties and fines for operator training. So it meant that now there was funding there to send people to school, to pay for different things, and then there was the training contact hours. To keep your license, you needed to go to school now. Even after you took your test, you needed to. Before, someone would just take their license and hang it on the wall, and for 20 years never go to a course. Now, with the TCHs coming into effect for both water and wastewater collection and distribution, you needed to keep yourself updated on what was going on in the industry. And good examples are AWWA, Water Environment Federation, Rutgers University, all chimed in with that, all set up their programs, and it's worked out very well. I mean, I haven't heard anybody complain so far that there wasn't a way of getting hours for their license, to keep their license. The only thing that we don't have, and I thought we would see it this time, they re-upped the licensing laws without retiree status. I thought that they would take, I know Dennis Palmer worked on this, some other people worked on this, Joe Bonaccorso, where they would take your license if you retired and put it into a freeze mode where you wouldn't need your training contact hours only if you came back into the system, as an operator. You then would need to pick up where you left off as far as the hours and things like that. That didn't happen. So it just means if you retire now, if you don't somehow keep your hours up, you're going to lose your license.
Were there other business changes? I know you've described some. Were there other business changes that you saw during your career that affected the industry?
Yeah, I saw that businesses have become more organized now, and the customers now demand quality water delivered 24/7 at a reasonable cost. So it's more, before it was more an operator thing, now it's a lot of it's a management thing where you have to manage the business, you have to watch your costs, you have to watch, people now know what a gallon of water costs you and how much you're making profit on it. So the public now is more conscious of water treatment. And plus the fact that when I was as a director, and even when I was manager or superintendent, I always told our employees, you have to act like, because most of the times, water or wastewater is the only game in town. There's only one utility in town. And I always preach to them, you have to act like there's 3 other authorities in town, that you're in competition. You have to be respectful of the customers, be there on time. If you make an appointment, make sure they're on time. The office answer the phones, make sure those phones are answered, so you try to do a complete, I always try to communicate between the office and the field to make sure that everybody was on the same page.
Would you describe your AWWA experience?
I going to different seminars. They've been very good as far as the education, going to different conferences, in Atlantic City, national conferences. I've been all over the country through the nationals. Seen many exhibits, bring back a lot of information from the different conferences. Plus, I made a lot of lifelong friends. I mean, that's something that you cherish, that these friends, they're not just there for the business. We sit down for dinner and different things, and there's just a lot of camaraderie between the groups. And on the I know the water used to have Jeopardy down there in Atlantic City, and the nationals. I've been involved with that, since some of the teams and things like that. So there's a lot more to it than just, and like I started to say, you learn more sometimes going to some of the meetings than you do sitting in a class, because you sit there and sometimes you talk to an operator, and an operator will say, or a manager, they'll say, well, gee, I had the same problem, here's how I solved it, or you may give them some advice. And I think that always works out. There's always a return that you bring back from these meetings.
Good. What advice do you have for those people who are just starting their career?
Work ethic first. Be conscious of what your surroundings are. Look for opportunities, and you want to make sure that you work ethically in terms of make sure your numbers are correct. That you look for the opportunities that this industry offers, especially going for licenses, and because I think the licenses are a jumping off point for people that want to become eventually into management, because when you reach a certain degree of licensing, and a lot of people have that going to college as well as taking those licenses when you get into the 3s and the 4s, that you then get into a management situation. And, a management can lead to a lot of different things for you. I think the thing I always tell somebody starting new is latch on to somebody that knows the business, that you can trust, that they'll take you around and show you, and just basically work hard.
What important memories do you cherish most from your career?
Well, the memories I have are the people that I've dealt with, the jobs. I met a lot of the families, through the years, because we had these holiday parties, where people come in. The board members have always been good to me. The workers have. It was hard for me to leave when I retired. I wasn't asked to leave. I left on my own accord. Then I, beside my wife and my children, I had lunch, believe it or not. I sat down. I got invited when I was on the Water Environment Federation Executive Committee. They had a request for some of us to sit down with the King of Sweden. And there's a young guy from the streets of South Philadelphia that now is going to be able to sit down with the King of Sweden, Gustav. And that was back in 1994 in Chicago. And that was one of the best memories I had. And besides winning which was to me the awards I've won from the AWWA and from the WEF, those all have been awards that I cherish, that I look at. But I cherish my wife. I have to get that in.
Okay. Looking back at your career, were there any mistakes that were made?
I think the biggest mistake I made was not knowing about the water and wastewater industry sooner. I wished that I got into it sooner than wasted 12 or 13 years in an industry that went nowhere, that was no future. I knew when I got into this, even as a laborer, I knew that there was potential for this. I just looked at some of the people around me, and they weren't worried the next day they weren't going to have a job. That was my biggest concern back then. The 2 children, and that I would have a job. And I recall that I went to work in there. Didn't know much about it. They put me in a drying bed, a sludge drying bed. And I had been used to working in a tailor shop, which was piecework. As many coats you did, that's what you got paid for. And I looked at the sludge and I said, well, gee, you're never going to run out of this stuff, so I'm not going to worry about, not having enough water. And I really, I think the water and wastewater industry gets in your blood. And that's the type of thing. That's how I feel about it now. There isn't a better industry.
How did you balance the demands of your workload and your home life?
One of the things I found that, I explained to my children, that this was a 24/7 job, because I was called out many, many days, called out on water main breaks, sewer main breaks. Even when I was as executive director, there were certain water main breaks I would go out on, or sewer main breaks, or problems out there that people were having. I made sure I would go out even on some of those. And I explained to my family early on that this is the type of job that I could be called on any time to go out. And I remember times I was actually down in a hole with a water main break, early on, and I'm on a two-way radio because we didn't have cell phones, or wishing my wife a Happy New Year from down, in a water main break. But the biggest thing I found is get your family or your wife involved. Like I've had my wife, Jeannie, involved with both water and wastewater. She's on some of the committees. She runs the Wheel of Fortune Committee for the water environment. For the South Jersey Water Superintendents, she used to buy all the gifts for their ladies' night and help out with the ladies' night. So instead of her saying, "Where you going?" to another meeting, she would say, "When is the meeting?" And she would be glad to go with me. So I think you have to get your family involved. They got to buy into it.
What advice do you have for those who would begin their retirement soon?
Well, financially, make sure that you're going to have the finances to keep you in the lifestyle you're used to. I mean, it's not good to retire and then have to come right back out of retirement because you don't have enough money to take care of it. But also, you want to create a succession plan that is going to leave a good taste in the employer's mouth, that you're leaving at a good time. And you don't want to plan your retirement too far in advance, because you don't know if your plans will change in between. You plan it 3 years in advance, and all of a sudden you say, well, I'm going to stay another 2 years. And that happened to me because I was going to retire at 58, 62, and then retire at 66. So, but you don't want to plan it, not give them enough time either. You want to make sure that you give them enough time that when you do retire, they have plenty of time for people to get in place, put in place for your job. And that's about,
Did you have a mentor in the industry, and describe them and tell us how they helped you?
I actually had two mentors. One was the superintendent at Cherry Hill, Ron Hepkin. I remember when I started working there, leaving Mount Laurel, I went to Cherry Hill and sitting in the lunchroom. I was an operator, and they all said to me, listen, don't get a license here, because if you do, they fire you. And I went into my boss and I said to him, I'm going for a license, but I hear if I do. And he said to me, listen, I don't want a bunch of people out there that don't know the business. Go get your license. He signed the paper immediately for me. So it was just people telling you not to do it. And then the second mentor was Robert Flynn. Bob was one of those kind of guys that said, you go, they saw the potential in me to get ahead, because I wasn't one of the kind of guys just sit around. They knew I was trying to get ahead. And they said, you go. They sent me to the meetings. They sent me to conferences. I remember my first conference, I had heard all the time how, and this was when I worked in Cherry Hill, I had heard all these conferences in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and all these other different places. And the first one they sent me was in Philadelphia, which I just moved out of. I lived in Philadelphia, so it was okay. It was still, I learned a lot. And then I started going to some of the conferences. I got involved with Operations Challenge. I was a coach for the Operations Challenge team for water environment. I did that for quite a while. But I think what they saw was the potential to bring back things. They send you out, and if you come back and you didn't learn anything or you didn't pick up anything, then it wasn't worth it. But they saw when I came back, I had all these new ideas and how we can change things, how we can make things better. And I think they thought about that after and said, hey, this is one guy we want to send out, because we know he's going to bring things back.
Very good. Is there anything you'd like to add? Any wisdom you would like to impart upon the people viewing this video?
The only wisdom I would say is people coming into this industry, it's a very good industry. The AWWA is a great organization to belong to. I belonged to it for many, many years. I'm actually a retired member of AWWA. And I would say this industry is one of the best industries you'll ever want to work in. It has its ups and downs. There are times when you're going to be mad because you're out, 3 o'clock in the morning in a water main break, and even with management people, you're going to get calls from the customer saying the water's rusty, the water's this, the water's that. If you go through the AWWA, their manuals, you'll find a lot of resolutions to these problems. If you look it up, or call other operators. But I think that this is one of the best businesses you want to be in.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.